Good morning, everyone, and happy Thursday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we're looking at the 70-week prophecy of Daniel, Daniel 9:24 through 27. I've stated this before. Let me say it again. Daniel chapter 9 is really and truly the foundational premise of all dispensationalism. Now, in an upcoming video, I'm going to be sharing with you why and how there could not be a gap of so far 2,000 years in the text of Daniel chapter 9. Thomas Ice, with whom I've had 4 debates, claims that there is a gap in the text of Daniel chapter 9. Well, no, there's not. And I'd be more than happy to debate Mr. Ice once again on that very issue. But I can tell you, Mr. Ice has been challenged repeatedly to debate me again and adamantly refuses to debate me again. Now, Daniel chapter 9, in our last video, we talked about how 70 weeks were determined to make the atonement. Only Jesus could make the atonement. The atonement was not made in the days of Menelaus, the man who killed Onias, who was the last certified Levitical Aaronic priest in Jerusalem. From the time of his killing onward, even to the days of Jesus, there was no certified, pure, qualified high priest. It is Jesus who came. It is Jesus who came after the order of Melchizedek and made the atonement. Well, Daniel 9:24 also says 70 weeks are determined to bring in everlasting righteousness. Look, if there's any one thing that sets forth a contrast between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, it is the concept of righteousness. In the Old Testament, it sets forth the righteousness of God and how Torah could not give righteousness. Wonderful law, great law, but all that the Old Covenant did was condemn. As Paul said in Romans chapter 7, I was alive once without the law. The commandment came, sin revived, and I died. And Paul says, I find then that which is intended to give life, instead it brought death. And so he had to say in Galatians chapter 3, 20 and 21, is the gospel then, is Christ then against the promises of God? Well, God forbid. Is the law then against the promises of God? God forbid. For verily, if a law could have been given that could have given life, watch this, then righteousness, do you see how righteousness and life are used interchangeably here? Then verily righteousness would have been through the law. The law didn't give righteousness. Was it holy? Yes. Was it spiritual even? Yes. Could it impart righteousness? No. All those who are under the law are under the curse. Galatians chapter 3, 10 and following. Now, if there's any one thing in all of Daniel chapter 9 that demonstrates and proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that this great prophecy is about the resurrection, about the Messianic Kingdom, although virtually all of these constituent elements prove it, but this one element certainly does, to bring in everlasting righteousness. Now remember, we are told by some former preterists that Daniel 9 has nothing to do with Jesus. Daniel 9 essentially is not even messianic in any form. That debate, by the way, took place on Facebook over a period of weeks and months even. And that statement was very, very clear. There was a denial that Daniel 9 is messianic. Well, if Daniel 9 is not messianic, then what in the world does bring in everlasting righteousness mean? Number one, the law could never give everlasting righteousness. Number two, the law itself was not everlasting righteousness. Number three, the law looked forward to the arrival of everlasting righteousness. Let me say this again. The slaying of Onias, the last, quote, righteous high priest, and the establishment in his place of a murderous, lecherous, immoral, lying, murderous high priest did not bring in everlasting righteousness. But you see, that's supposed to be the time at which the 70 weeks of Daniel were fulfilled. Really? How does the killing of the last high priest, how does the defilement of the temple and the priesthood and the sacrifices, how does that establish everlasting righteousness? Well, hello, it doesn't. No way, no shape, no form, no how. But you see, Paul, who taught nothing but the hope of Israel found in Moses, the law, and the prophets, looked forward to the very, very imminent time to him of the arrival of the hope of righteousness. Galatians chapter 5, verse 5, Paul said, "And now we, through the Spirit, eagerly anticipate the hope of righteousness." Well, where did Paul's hope of righteousness come from? Well, it certainly came from Isaiah 65, Isaiah 66. It certainly came from Isaiah 46. It certainly came from Isaiah 60 through 66. And it certainly came from Daniel chapter 9. Where do you suppose Daniel is basing, the angel is basing, the great prophecy of the arrival of everlasting righteousness? Did not Isaiah foretell the coming of the new heaven and the new earth wherein dwells righteousness? Isaiah 65, 66? Of course he did. So here we have this great prophecy of the bringing in of everlasting righteousness. Peter, in 2 Peter chapter 3, said, according to his promise, we look for a new heaven and a new earth wherein dwells righteousness. Well, once again, where did Peter get his idea of the coming world of righteousness, the new world of righteousness? Well, he tells us, verse 1 and 2, that promise came not only from Jesus, not only from the apostles, but it came from the old covenant prophets, who foretold the coming of everlasting righteousness through the death of the Messiah, his suffering, and the glory to follow. Well, Daniel 9 foretold the sufferings of Christ and the glory to follow. There is virtually no doubt whatsoever that Daniel 9 must be a prediction of the coming of the new heaven and the new earth. That means it's a prediction of the resurrection of the dead. Because remember, as we've seen in our study of 1 Corinthians 15, the resurrection brings in the new heaven and the new earth. It is in that new heaven and that new earth where old things are passed away, all things are made new, and that's 2 Corinthians 5:17. It had already broken in, it had already been initiated, it was about to be consummated. It is in this new creation where there's no more sin. Daniel 9, 70 weeks are determined to put an end to sin. And that's for those in Christ. Through the power of Christ's blood, he sees us and sees no sin. That's the power of the fulfillment of the 70 weeks of Daniel in bringing in everlasting righteousness. Now, when was the end of that to be? Well, one thing is for certain, the death of Jesus is after the 69th week. That means it's in the 70th week. And the next thing that we read about is the people of the prince that will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. It will be with an overwhelming flood of verse 27. That's AD 70. And thus, the new heaven and new earth, the resurrection of the dead, had to have occurred before or at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. Listen, be sure to go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Get a copy of my book, 70 Weeks Are Determined for the Resurrection. I have an in-depth discussion of the bringing in of everlasting righteousness and, by the way, all of the other constituent elements of Daniel chapter 9:24, demonstrating without any doubt whatsoever, number one, it's messianic. Number two, it is about Jesus the Messiah. And number three, it was fulfilled by the time of the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. You'll be absolutely amazed at the clarity and the power and the amount of evidence that goes in proving that. So go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and order this book. You'll be absolutely thrilled that you did. You'll be overjoyed at the salvation that is in Christ and the comfort that gives. So order the book. Be sure you mention that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll pay your shipping. Well, thanks for joining me so much for this morning's morning musings. Do not forget that beginning in November, I'm going to be reviewing, responding to, and debunking the book by Brock Hollett entitled Debunking Preterism. You don't want to miss what I will share with you beginning in November. Okay, thanks so much for joining me. You have a fantastic weekend. Lord willing, we'll see you on Monday.